Hi, this is your Sapil Bhartia and welcome to TFL Let's Talk. Today we have with us once again Nick Mistry, SVP and CISO at Lineaje. Nick, it's great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yes, my pleasure to have you here again. We talked a few weeks ago at the Open Source Summit. And today we are going to talk about survey and the findings, the whole CISA software development attestation form. Before we go all on there, just you have also been traveling a lot, covering or attending some of these security conferences. So just quickly talk about what's keeping you busy these few weeks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we've been, as you mentioned, attending several security conferences, really having an opportunity to engage face to face with many of our customers and people within the industry as well. So, software supply chain and software supply chain security seems to be a growing area of interest across the industry. And, it's really good to get feedback from the practitioners as to what they're concerned about, where their challenges are. So very useful for me personally and for us here at Lineage.
Well, let's talk about the survey, the report that you folks recently conducted. First of all, talk about the idea behind that report.
At RSA, we decided to do a survey among the cybersecurity professionals to understand what the awareness is with regard to the government's efforts and CISA's efforts to ensure software producers are providing an attestation letter conforming to the requirements to protecting the software supply chain, as well as other requirements with regard to software bill of materials and SBOMs. And really our goal was to see, what's been the impact? Is the industry at large paying attention? Are they aware? Because we see these movements by the federal government as very positive in terms of helping us understand risks and managing risks in the software supply chain. So that was really our intent, was to see what impact the actions from the government is having in terms of awareness and understanding.
And were you happy, satisfied with that? Or you're like, hey, you know what? There are a lot of companies everybody wants security, but they, despite their want, they are not prepared. They are not fully have the strategy in place.
Actually, we were, quite honestly, we were a bit surprised by, the responses that we received in terms of, there seemed to be an acknowledgement of the need, but there also seemed to be the industry is still, I would say, from the survey, becoming more aware and starting to implement, but very early stages, right? So I think the awareness is there. However, the actual implementation with regard to software bill of materials and other actions to secure the supply chain, it seems that most companies we interviewed are in early stages or haven't really started yet. So that was interesting.
Can you talk about some of the findings? And I'm not talking about the findings. Okay, let's look at both sides. Few things that you were expecting that, hey, this is the trend, so you're aware of that. And there are certain things that you were shocked. Like, for example, when I was going through the documentation, especially it was like a lot of companies, they were not even aware of a lot of executive orders that came out. They're also not kind of prepared in terms of requirements. So can you talk about the expected and some of the shocking findings?
Yeah, absolutely. We certainly expected the awareness around software supply chain security risks. However, we were surprised by the fact that about 80% of the respondents were not familiar with the recent executive order and also the CISA requirements from a software supply chain perspective.
How is the security industry building a bridge between like these executive orders, some of the recommendations or mandates or requirements of government versus your consumers, B2B? How are you building a bridge to kind of bridge this gap between the awareness of the executive orders or what the work government is doing, at the same time not just awareness, but next step is to actually empower them with tools, technologies, culture to keep up with that?
That's a great question, and it's one that I think as an industry we really need to focus on. We ourselves here at Lineage are doing a tremendous amount in terms of outreach. We do participate in these forums, as well as try to evangelize as much as possible, get the awareness out there, because it's incredibly important. Incidents like SolarWinds, Log4j, I think, were ones that come to mind, obviously, about what's needed, and these executive orders really focus on helping secure our industry supply chain. If you just look at all our critical infrastructure and all of the services we get within critical infrastructure, the exposure is tremendous, right? And then having all the vendors that support critical infrastructure, having the awareness and knowledge to support these executive orders, I think is necessary. How can, as an industry, we can help? I think there's an opportunity to start formalizing software supply chain almost as its own discipline, right? So it is usually grouped together as a software security assurance or software security practices. But I think it's a little deeper than that. I think it's a little more nuanced, and I think it's early days, but there's a lot of maturity in the industry that's probably still needed, and I think that's how we can bridge it, is really focus it in on as its own discipline and how to address it.
And also the deadline is fast approaching, June 11th, and it once again seems like most companies were not even aware of that. So there are chances that most of these will not be meeting or beating the deadline.
Well, so the early deadline in June is for what's called critical software. So my suspicion is anybody who's providing critical software to the government is most likely aware and is going to meet that deadline. However, there is a second deadline for all software. So this is any and all software, which is in September of this year. Based on the survey results, I would suspect that there will be many that probably won't make that second deadline. I'm pretty confident the first deadline they will make, because these are companies that are providing critical software. They do a significant amount of work with critical infrastructure in the government, so I'm pretty sure they will make the deadline. I'd be surprised if there are very many that don't. But it's really that second deadline which I think we'll see an opportunity to further bridge that gap, right, that you mentioned.
Can you do a PSA related to the second deadline, the need, the point, and what resources these companies have at their disposal so that they can meet the second deadline?
For the second deadline, what's required is for software companies to be able to attest to the requirements within the Executive Order 14028, which really breaks down 4 areas. One is you're able to attest that your build pipeline, meaning the pipeline and tools you use to build your software, is secure. The second one is that you understand and can validate your entire software supply chain. This is all the third-party and open source components you're using to build your software. The third is making sure you maintain what they call provenance, that you actually know where all of your software comes from, including not only third parties and open source, but all of their dependencies. And then the fourth is having a vulnerability disclosure program and disclosing vulnerabilities in a timely manner to the government for the software that they're using. So those are the 4 main areas that people need to be able to attest to and say that they have strong programs. What we are recommending our customers and the industry at large is, because the CEO is signing off that this is there is a strong sense of liability. The government's shifting liability to software producers. So before you sign the attestation letter, how do you ensure you're actually meeting all of these requirements become critically important? And we're working with several of our customers today in automating that entire process, because ultimately you want to be able to test with independently verifiable evidence. So if anybody, part of the executive order requires federal agencies to further investigate and ask for proof that companies can meet these requirements, this proof is what we actually capture and manage. It also help companies, if they're not able to meet the requirements, to have solutions in place so that they can conform and then confidently attest to those requirements before they submit to the federal government. Because if we, working with our customers, can identify risks and find where they're not compliant, the federal government's going to be able to do that as well. You should know what before you submit, what evidence is offered, so that you know what they will see when they analyze your software, right? There should be no surprises there.
Irrespective of these deadlines, there are two things. One is that, hey, there is certain requirements, compliance can be there. We can call them, hey, you need to have those check boxes there. At the same time, there are a lot of practices. Well, in one way, they're nice to have. And second thing is that if you have right practices in place, those check boxes will already be marked. So how does Lineage help companies to ensure secure software development, irrespective of meeting or beating the deadlines?
Irrespective of meeting the deadlines and the requirements, I totally agree with you that if you have sound security practices in place from a software development perspective, being able to meet those compliance requirements will be kind of one of the byproducts, right? It is not the central focus, but it is, enables you to meet the check marks. What we do here at Lineage is we really are helping companies understand what's in their software. So one of the biggest challenges in industry today, even if you have secured your build pipeline, you actually do not know what's in your software, because when you pull in open source software, it's pulling in other open source. And all of those dependencies are really hard to basically understand. So we illuminate all of that. And the second thing we do is we attest to the integrity of every component in your software, even at your source code, at the time of build, and at time of deploy. This is an independent validation verification that your software supply chain hasn't been compromised at every stage. So even if you have your best practice in place, you can still be compromised. If there are active threats, active actors trying to compromise your build system, they can get in. What we're doing is independently verifying that nothing's happened by looking at the actual code itself, looking at the binaries, and looking at what's the deployed package, and comparing all of those components back to a good known source.
When it comes to government's involvement, especially with security, it becomes tricky. Sometimes the industry is ahead. Of course, when we talk about government entities, it's a totally different ballgame altogether. But there are certain cases, like for example, in Europe, Cyber Resiliency Act. It has been frowned upon. The idea is good, the intentions are great, but due to lack of better coordination with the open source community, there are some. I mean, we all know some hiccups are there. What are your thoughts on that? At the same time, can you also talk about how closely companies like Lineage work with government entities to kind of flow off, where the industry is, where the market is, so that there are no such friction points there?
No, certainly anything the government does has a tremendous impact on the industry at large, right? Anywhere from setting the minimum standards from a security perspective, because they have a significant purchasing power, right? If you look at everybody doing business with the government, it's a pretty large swath of companies. So in that way, they do wield a tremendous amount of influence in setting those standards. That said, I would have to say, from my experience working especially with the U.S. government, they have created multiple channels for industry to work with the government in striking what I would say is a healthy balance. One, in pushing the industry to adopt better security within the software supply chain, which is desperately needed. I mean, no one's going to argue after SolarWinds, Log4j, and many of these other supply chain incidences that it's something doesn't need to happen. So it's good that they're doing that. But on the flip side, Lineage, I personally have participated and continue to participate within industry and government working groups. Like CISA has several SBOM and software supply chain working groups. Those are great avenues to collaborate and provide feedback to the government. And also, they often issue formal requests for responses. GSA had done so last year with their software bill of materials, RFI, request for information. So has Army and a few other agencies. Those are great opportunities for feedback. From my perspective, I think CISA has done a lot to engage the government in particular around this in industry and government in this around software supply chain. So we fully support those initiatives. We're part of the MITRE System of Trust community, which is another commercial government entity to help further security requirements in the space, also help drive standards. So the SBOM standards, the other risk identification standards are things that we here at Lineage work very closely with the government, because standards do help as well, right? It creates a mechanism to make it easier for companies and the industry to understand, okay, what's needed, how do I measure how well I'm doing with these security measures.
We talk about culture a lot, talk a bit about the importance of culture when it comes to, of course, the answer is pretty obvious, but I just want to reinforce that view when it comes to security. How important is culture versus, hey, if you have all the tools, this is not an area where you also need cultural change in the organization.
I think having the mindset of understanding how how security is both not only a compliance requirement, but is critical to business. We're finding by implementing security, especially within the software development practices, if done correctly and further left in the process, actually saves money, actually can be a business enabler, removing what I would call, a lot of these security issues are a result of tech debt that have piled up. So having a culture that's focused on continually refining and improving their software, including removing and addressing risk or mitigating risk, what we found has tremendous impacts on efficiency, on ability to add new features and capabilities, reducing what we would call not only technical debt, but also complexity in the code. So, from my perspective, I think the cultural adaptation that I think needs to happen, and many companies are making this shift, is security isn't just for security or compliance. It actually is an enabler for business. By helping improve hygiene, you actually improve the quality of the code, which in turn helps you be much more nimble in terms of adding features and reacting to the market in general.
Earlier, you were talking about standards. When it comes to SBOMs, can you talk about, there are a lot of open source projects, SPDX is one, and then there are a lot of commercial proprietary products. We also talk about XBOMs, which is the next step, it goes beyond. So what kind of changes, evolution you're seeing when it comes to software bill of material, especially after the executive order?
The initial guidance from the Executive Order 14028 with regard to software bill of materials was tied to the NTIA minimum requirements for software bill of materials, or SBOM, which is great. It's a great starting point. But one of the things we're finding is that we need to evolve to beyond the minimum standard as an industry to really provide the information necessary to assess risk in software. So we think it's a great start, and many of the folks in the industry actually are actively working with CISA right now to provide guidance on going beyond the minimum standards, to provide information about not just what the ingredient list is, but exactly what the source of those components are, providing that information accurately, providing relationships between dependencies more accurately, and then providing hash, right? Providing the hash of the component that they're using. These are all things that I think are the next steps. And then you mentioned things like, the X bomb, and now there is a AI bomb that's also being, promulgated out there. So I think this is just early stages. We will see, certainly, and I'm seeing it already, is evolution of the concept of bill of materials extend to software, to include other types of software. And in fact, CISA just launched, and Lineage is participating on what we call the system bomb or system SBOM, which I think is really the right direction. Software doesn't live on its own; it usually lives within a system. And how does that then relate to understanding what's in a system? But more importantly, all of this is not simply documenting what's in a software or a system. It's about how do you identify risks and how do you manage the risks based on that information. So it really laser focused on that. And then we're also involved in the early stages of the AI bomb working group. Certainly, very exciting to think through what does a bill of materials look like for an AI application, and AI models themselves, and we look forward to evolving that as well, with working with the working group at CISA.
And since you have thrown the AI wrench there, and Gen AI is one of the hottest topic these days. Either way, because when we talk about Gen AI, it's not as simple as the LAMP stack. What kind of security challenges you see there? Because we can talk about, I don't want to open the whole can of worms of privacy, security, and then copyright. But so I just want to focus on the security aspect. And I think you and I talked earlier also to look at it from both perspectives: Gen AI as a workload, at the same time Gen AI as technology to help with security with this bombs.
From a security perspective, when you look at applications that are AI or ML applications, they're also 90% open source, or built from 90% open source. So understanding the supply chain security and threats within an AI application is incredibly important. I think we can do that with traditional software supply chain approaches to building a solid software bill of materials. But equally important, I mentioned this earlier, is understanding the integrity of all of these components. Have they been compromised? Are they actually a component that can be trusted? Is really important when we think about AI and what we're using AI for. That takes on a whole new level, right? From a security implication standpoint. And the same needs to be done in terms of understanding, if you will, the company's name is Lineage, and we discover the lineage of your software, but also understanding the lineage of your AI and your and the models that you're using, and can they be trusted? Are there unknown components? Are there components that may be untrustworthy, if you will, right? Where you can't identify them, you can't fully trust them. And I think the same concepts apply, from software to also AI in those regards. Now, using AI to help, identify risks and mitigate those risks, we're doing that today. So with Lineage, we definitely use AI. Once we've identified the risks within your software supply chain, we're really focused on remediation. And this is where I think AI has a strong potential to help us identify the best ways to remediate risk within your software. It's certainly not trivial. It's not as easy as simply, I'm on version 1 of this open source component, I want to go to version 10 because it remediates that vulnerability. We look at compatibility analysis, making sure changes won't break your software, make it harder for you to actually implement. We also make sure that you're not introducing new risks, right? Making some of these changes. And the last part is an area we're really excited about, which is the ability to, what we're finding is about 56% of vulnerabilities in open source today do not have a fix. There's no patch or configuration to actually address that vulnerability. Is leveraging AI to help us fork, branch that component, and leveraging AI with a developer to much more rapidly then address how do we fix that component and contribute it back. Those are really early days, but something that we're very focused on. And I know you were part of, last time we spoke, we had just launched the open source manager product, and that is really where that's focused, is looking at open source risks and leveraging AI to help mitigate those risks.
Nick, once again, thank you so much for joining me today. Talk about the whole security landscape, the whole working with government entities. Thanks for those great insights, and I look forward to chatting with you again. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.